Yo, what's good, y'all, man? We got full theory. New York pizza is the best. You feel me? I did heard New York pizza is the best. I've never been to New York yet. Not yet, though. You know what I'm saying? But I did heard New York pizza the best. But, hey, I live in Chicago, and I think my pizza is the best. You know what I mean? I think my pizza is the best, though. I'll depend my pizza in the motherfucking video type shit. You feel me? He said, and I can prove it. Yeah, prove that motherfucker. I am trying to try New York pizza. You know what I'm saying? Actually in New York, you know what I'm saying? You know they been having like New York pizzas in y'all, you know, different cities like this New York pizza, but you gotta be in New York this to, you feel me, be in that environment type shit. But yeah, like it up, sub, and yeah, let's get it.
Now, if you've been following our theories for a while, you might be aware that I lived in New York City for about 2 years. It's actually
I ain't not know that. I ain't not know that, though.
the place where game theory was born. See that door right there? Sorry, it might be hard to make out behind that massive head of hair. Didn't have enough money for a haircut. Anyway, that right there, that was my first ever recording closet. Honestly, there's
Okay. Hey, start somewhere, though, man. Okay.
a lot of tough things about living in New York. Everything is super cramped, everything is super expensive. The weather can be both brutally cold in the winter and
Yeah, just like Chicago.
brutally hot in the summer. But you don't want to turn up the air conditioning because your electric bill is going to jump by a couple $100 if you do, so instead you just lay there melting into a puddle. The streets are crowded and the public transportation is a thing that sometimes exists. There is plenty of things not to love about living in New York, but one thing that cannot be denied is that New York has incredible pizza. I've lived on the East Coast, the West Coast, in the North, in the South, and nowhere in the US compares.
Not Chicago. Chicago got that deep pit. I said deep pit. Deep pizza.
Heck, it even has some of the best pizza internationally. But why? Why can't anywhere else seem to match what New York's able to do with their pizza pies? Well, we here at Team Theorist actually did some testing, and what we found is that it all boils down to one secret ingredient: love.
Hey, I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Sorry, that was a joke. We're talking about New York here. The secret ingredient certainly isn't love. Nope, the secret ingredient is actually this: water. But how could a clear, tasteless, odorless
Water.
liquid make such a big difference when making a pizza
Water.
pie? My friends, you are never gonna believe it. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Food Theory, the show that smuggles water across state lines for science. Ever since that stint in New York, I've always wondered about the city's reputation as the pizza capital of the United States. Like, why? What are they doing there that's so unique that it can't be replicated in other parts of the country? If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me catch you up. New York-style pizza is defined specifically as a large pizza with a very, very thin crust. It's thin and crispy, not gummy or chewy, but also not so crispy and hard that it's like a cracker. It also
Hey, I know what you're talking about.
has some real nice char on the bottom. And yet, go almost anywhere else in the country and you can't find pizza that's able to do what they do in New York. Even in some of the biggest food cities. I mean,
Hey, Chicago got deep dish. Put a respect on my name. Put a respect on my name.
lived in Los Angeles for a decade, and I practically swore off pizza for those 10 years because of how bad LA pizza is. I did eventually find one place with great pizza, Grimaldi's, and wouldn't you know it, it was a restaurant that had its start in New York. But like, how hard can it truly be? It doesn't seem like it should be that difficult for literally any other part of the country. From a logic perspective, New York City's an island. It has no farms, no fields, no cows. In short, it's basically a desert for fresh local ingredients. So if anything, New York should be working at a disadvantage when it comes to the flour, cheese, and tomato that they need for a typical pie.
Oh, it is though, because it is full. That's why I said New York is full of water. That's why a lot of people say like New York is basically like a water city. Cause that's what it is though. It's full of, you know, I got bridges, not bridges, but you know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, bridges.
But the truth is, the secret ingredient, the X factor, appears to be none of those things. If you ask the locals, they'll tell you that none of that other stuff matters. They'll tell you that it's all about the water. That's right, the ingredient that's clear, tasteless, odorless, and mostly evaporates while baking is apparently the key ingredient for that signature thin, crispy New York crust. But when you ask why, no one actually has a reason. It's just the thing that the locals say. So you know what? I wanted to test it. To come clean, this is one of those questions that I've wanted to answer since before before this channel even existed. In other words, today's episode is the latest installment in the old Matt Pat uses his YouTube channel as a platform to answer a personal curiosity that he's had for years. So, does the water in New York make that much of a difference? And if so, why? What is the secret ingredient inside of the secret ingredient? Let me tell you, when I started breaking down this mystery, it got way more interesting than I could have ever imagined. So do not click away. You're not gonna believe what I found. The biggest challenge with testing this whole thing was getting water from different parts of the country all at the same time. Luckily, Zach, one of our longtime researchers, had a wedding to go to up north in New Jersey.
Damn, hey. That's what's up.
So, at my request, in between the vows and the reception, he was able to siphon off a few gallons of the good stuff. What else are wedding guests supposed to do while the bride and groom are taking their pictures? Eat? Drink? Have fun? No! They're doing science. I then asked Zach to ship me a few more gallons from his hometown in Richmond, Virginia, a city not particularly known for its mind-melting pizza. No offense, guys. And, of course, we also had some local North Carolina water to use as well to give us a third test case. The goal was to create 3 pizzas, all identical
okay, I see what they're gonna do. Yeah.
to each other with only one variable, the source of the water. One using the New Jersey water, one using the Richmond, Virginia water, and one using the water from Raleigh, North Carolina.
And what about Chicago?
From there, we could then compare the pizzas in the specific areas that define a typical New York pie, a super thin crust that's able to stay crisp but flexible. We also looked at the overall flavor. All the pizzas were made at the exact same time using the exact same method and ingredients. 1.5 cups of each kind of water were heated to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, then mixed with a tablespoon of yeast, 2 cups of flour, 1/2 tablespoon of sugar, and 1 teaspoon of salt. We then stirred in an additional 1/2 cup of flour with a final 1/2 cup used to cover the kneading surface. Each ball of dough was kneaded for 15 minutes and then put into Tupperware containers where it was left to rest for about a day. You see, the flavor of Italian pizza dough actually relies on this resting and rising process to let the yeast start to ferment the dough and produce the signature.
True that. Hey, the right dose or the right yeast, what you wanna call it, that'd be the best pizza, no cap. So if the dough right, that pizza gonna be right, no cap, real shit.
Alcohol flavor. You might think that you don't taste alcohol in bread, but actually all yeast-based bread has some level of alcohol in it.
Oh, I do? Oh, some of them do though, but you don't really taste it though. Like they be saying, oh, they got, I forget, what's it called, like whiskey in there, you know what I mean, or some foods, but you don't taste that shit. Cause I mean they did it so you won't, taste that motherfucker. They put more ingredients to it.
It's one of the main flavors that makes pizza crust so delicious. Anyway, we left our dough to rest for 24 hours, which gave it plenty of time to proof and develop some of that flavor before we got ready to make some serious pizza. But shockingly, upon pulling the dough out of the containers, there were immediate and very obvious differences. Coming out of the resting bowls, the North Carolina dough was
yeah, that ain't good.
Thick and tough. It looked like a standard dough. The Virginia dough was much wetter and more slippery. Very strange difference, but the New Jersey dough was a beast all its own. It was
That's close to New York.
Thin. It was slimy. It stretched much thinner and much more quickly. It was literally like soup, like a big watery oatmeal. When it came to tearing, the doughs made with Virginia and North Carolina waters were harder to tear, and when it did, the dough around the hole tended to be thick. New Jersey's dough, on the other hand, stretched very easily, which made it a lot more challenging to work with. But when it tore, the dough around it was always translucent because everything was able to stretch so thinly. In fact, to even get it to have some solid substance in order to make the pizzas, we had to feed it more flour. Real talk, guys, this was just one of those episodes that I never expected to have a real clear answer. I thought that this was going to be some sort of New York marketing ploy, but no, immediately it became clear that there was actually some truth here. The water was making a very palpable difference in the final product of the pizza dough. So I kept going. I covered the pizzas with some homemade sauce and a mozzarella mix before throwing them onto a preheated pizza stone for 12 minutes. The results were mind-blowing.
Dang, it look different as hell too. That look different, that look different, that look different.
The crusts on the North Carolina and Virginia pizzas on average wound up being about 10 millimeters thick. The New Jersey dough, meanwhile, with its more watery dough, 5 millimeters.
Yeah, I said that look different.
Literally half the thickness. Clearly, something was different here. But what? The only difference, after all, was just the water.
You know what I'm saying, dude? Yep, just the water.
So we decided to do some more testing. Not on pizza or its dough, this time on the waters themselves. It's not easy to isolate just one difference in the water between two regions. Heck, Even within the same city, different water sources can have slight differences in their composition. New York City itself pulls from 2 different sources at times, leading some residents to complain that their water tastes differently from other parts of town. So just
okay, yeah.
to make it crystal clear, from this point forward, I can't really make any statements about
learn something new every day though.
New York water, New Jersey water, or even Virginia and North Carolina water, because those categories are just way too broad. What I specifically can talk about are the tests that I did on the water samples that I had available. In order to figure out what might be happening here, the team and I did a bit of chemistry. First, I did a basic litmus test to check the general acidity of the waters. All the samples sat around 7.2 pH, just slightly more basic than neutral. Obviously, this was not our key differentiating factor. Next up, I pulled out my handy-dandy pool testing kit, which would tell me all sorts of different information, from total hardness, which is a measure of the amount of calcium in the water, free chlorine, which shows you the amount of chlorine in the water that hasn't reacted with anything, and total chlorine, which shows the combination of free chlorine and the chlorine that's been reacted to with things in the water. It also told me that none of the water had pool stabilizer in it, which, you know, is a good thing, because this is drinking water and not pool water. But
yeah, sure that.
Through these tests, there was one difference that was immediately clear. See the differences in those testing strips there? Total chlorine levels. Both Virginia water and North Carolina water, it seems, contain significantly more total chlorine than New Jersey water. Where New Jersey was registering something like 1 part per million of chlorine, Virginia, they were registering closer to 5. That's heavy, even for a pool. So what's chlorine gonna do in our food? Well, when you put it in water, chlorine kills microorganisms. In drinking water or swimming water, that's gonna be a good thing because many microorganisms can make us sick. But when it comes to bread making, the chlorine seems to be killing off another microorganism, the yeast. Yeast is a tiny mushroom-like organism that chomps down on sugars and grains to produce carbon dioxide and alcohol as waste. Alcohol and CO2, they're basically yeast poop. If you have something in the water that's poisoning the yeast, obviously you're gonna end up with less of that signature pizza crust flavor. But flavor isn't the only thing that's affected when you kill off yeast. To explain why that makes your pizza crust different, we have to zoom in to the molecular level. In bread dough, glutinous proteins line up and form chains connected by little chemical bridges called disulfide bonds. Long gluten chains can create tougher, crumblier bread. In fact, breadcrumb companies actually utilize methods to elongate the gluten chains in their dough as much as possible, thereby creating the extra crisp crunch that you expect out of a breadcrumb. On the other side of the molecular spectrum, shorter gluten chains create softer, chewier, and gummier bread. Now, when yeast dies, it releases a substance called glutathione, which is basically a partially digested gluten chain. Glutathione only has 1 sulfide bond, which means it can't bond with another gluten molecule and elongate the chain. The more glutathione you have, the more stubby, short gluten chains you have, and the chewier your bread. And again, some bakers want this. They'll purposely use dead yeast to create these shorter chains, resulting in softer, chewier doughs. This is the sort of stuff that's perfect if you want to make a nice, fluffy bread roll, but it's less than ideal for creating a thin, crispy pizza crust. The result? The additional chlorine in the Richmond and Raleigh water is killing off some of the yeast. That dead yeast is releasing glutathione, which is then interrupting the development of long gluten chains in the dough, thereby causing those doughs to become chewier, stodgier, and less like New York's. Meanwhile, the lower chlorine levels in New York water allow more yeast to survive. That living yeast in the New York dough then creates longer and longer chains, allowing the dough to stretch without tearing, which in turn produces the incredibly thin and crispy crust. But that's not all. There's another thing about New Jersey's water that could also be helping to make a thinner crust: fluoride. Fluoride is something that the US started putting into its water back in 1945 in an effort to help prevent tooth decay. But fluoride isn't just going to produce stronger teeth, it's also going to produce stronger bread. You see, fluoride is introduced into drinking water as the molecule NaF. NaF is a salt, just like its more well-known cousin NaCl. And just like any salt, NaF is going to dissolve in water. The Na and the F are going to go their separate ways and react with lots of different things. And scientists have actually studied what this process does in dough. According to the paper, ascorbate oxidase inhibition in dough by fluoride ion, adding salts into a dough is going to cause the resulting bread to get sturdier. If this is true, we'd expect the places with more fluoride in the water to have the stronger, crispier crusts. And this is exactly what the data shows us. Both Richmond, Virginia and Raleigh, North Carolina keep their fluoride levels as close to the federal minimum of 0.7 parts per million as possible. Meanwhile, New Jersey, they aim for 2. That is more than twice the amount of dough-firming salts that exist inside the New Jersey water. It's likely yet another factor that's helping the New Jersey crusts maintain a solid structure despite their thinness. This rigid structure can therefore support the same weight of cheese, sauce, and topping as a much thicker crust that's made with less fluoridated water. And again, the secret ingredient here is just that. It's just water. In short, short, I think the most interesting takeaway
Just water.
of all of this is that ingredients aren't always created equally, even when they seem to be the most innocuous thing in the world. Everything from your soil and climate to your local government ordinances can affect the end product of what you're really getting, even if it's called by the same name. And this whole thing applies not just to the raw ingredients themselves, but also to the recipes that are spawned from those ingredients. This whole thing kind of makes me wonder, could this be the reason San Francisco's renowned for its sourdough? Why New Orleans is the be-all end-all of beignets? Or, if I checked everything here in North Carolina, whether I'd be able to learn the secret of making the perfect biscuit. In fact, let me know down in the comments what your local specialty is. I'd be curious to see what local delicacies we have represented, and who knows, maybe me and my pool testing kit will wind up in your neck of the woods to understand scientifically the magic that's being created in your kitchen. So the next time you're in a different part of the country, or maybe a different country altogether, grab a few bottles from the tap to bring home and get cooking. But hey, that's just a theory. A food theory. Bon appetit.
Nah, fire video. And you learn something new every day when you watch the videos too. So yeah, hey, leave a like. So my channel, y'all, man, hit the bell. You know what I'm saying? No, hey, New York is the best pizza, but when it comes to deep dish, it's Chicago, no cap. So hey, like it up, sub. Yeah, alright, peace.